Let's talk about something no one really wants to admit, but everyone secretly hopes for. When someone who walked away suddenly wants back in, you've been left hanging, ghosted, maybe even told, "It's not you, it's me." And you're left wondering, why did they leave and why now? Why are they back? Here's the truth: avoidants don't leave because they stopped caring. They leave because closeness terrifies them. Intimacy feels like a trap. Vulnerability feels like weakness. So when things start to get real, they pull away. Not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much, and they don't know what to do with it. But here's the plot twist most people miss: avoidants come back. Not always, but often, and not out of guilt or boredom, but because something shifts inside them. A trigger flips the emotional switch. It might be silence. It might be your strength. It might be the realization that they sabotaged the best thing they ever had. Avoidants crave connection just like the rest of us. They just fear it more. But when you stop chasing, when you go no contact, focus on yourself, live your truth, they feel your absence deeply. It shakes them. And it forces them to confront what they've been running from all along. They come back when your silence speaks louder than your words ever could. They come back when they realize the love you gave wasn't ordinary. It was safe, it was rare, and they couldn't find it anywhere else. But here's the kicker: their return is not your validation. Their comeback is not your cue to forget the pain. It's your moment of clarity, to choose yourself, to understand your worth. And maybe, just maybe, to walk away for good. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving you. When avoidants pull away from a relationship, it's easy to assume they simply don't care. That they're cold, indifferent, or emotionally numb. But that assumption couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is much more complex, and far more human. Avoidants don't disconnect because they don't feel anything. They retreat because they feel too much, and those emotions are unfamiliar, overwhelming, and often terrifying for them. Intimacy, real closeness, demands vulnerability, and for an avoidant, vulnerability has been wired in their nervous system as danger. Often shaped by early attachment wounds, avoidants have learned to associate closeness with discomfort, sometimes even pain. Maybe they grew up in environments where emotions weren't safe to express, where independence was rewarded and emotional needs were met with rejection or ridicule. Over time, they internalize the belief that they can only rely on themselves. So when someone enters their life and offers genuine love, empathy, and connection, it doesn't feel safe. It feels threatening because it contradicts everything they've used to protect themselves. So what happens when the relationship deepens? When emotional stakes rise, their internal alarm system goes off. They may start finding fault in you, the relationship, or in themselves. They might say they feel trapped, or that they need space, even though you haven't pressured them. It's not about you. It's about the narrative inside them. If I let this person get too close, I'll lose myself. Or worse, I'll get hurt. In that moment, disconnecting feels safer than staying. They pull back, shut down, or disappear altogether, not as an act of cruelty, but as an unconscious act of self-preservation. Unfortunately, it leaves the other person confused and hurting, questioning your own worth. But the truth is, their retreat was never about a lack of feeling. It was about an overflow of feeling they didn't know how to handle. Avoidants have a deeply rooted fear of abandonment, just like anxious types, but they try to beat you to it by leaving first, or by never fully letting you in. They protect themselves by avoiding the very connection they crave. And often, it's only when they are alone, away from you, that they begin to realize how deep their feelings really were. But by then, the damage may already be done. Understanding this dynamic doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it can bring clarity to why avoidants come back later, often long after you've healed or moved on. They weren't emotionally absent. They were emotionally overwhelmed, and their fear of losing control took the wheel. One of the most confusing and frustrating parts of dealing with an avoidant partner is the sudden shift. One moment they're distant, silent, maybe even gone, and then later they resurface, seemingly out of nowhere. This isn't random. It's often triggered by your absence, not your presence. In fact, the more you chase or reach out to an avoidant after they pull away, the more they retreat. It reinforces their internal fear that closeness equals pressure. But when you go quiet, When you stop initiating, stop seeking closure, stop proving your worth. They feel it in a way that cuts through their defenses. Silence becomes the trigger that confronts them with something they can't run from: your absence. Avoidants don't process emotions the same way as others might. They often suppress their feelings until something external forces them to confront them. That external force is often you not being there anymore. The emotional distance they initially created to feel safe suddenly becomes uncomfortable. What once felt like relief, base, solitude, independence, starts to feel hollow. They expected peace, but instead they find an eerie quiet, a gnawing sense that something meaningful is missing. That something is you. In the absence of your energy, attention, and emotional availability, they start to reflect, slowly, not always consciously, but their minds begin revisiting memories, the laughter, the comfort, the safety you offered, the way they could be vulnerable, even if only briefly. These reflections begin to chip away at their emotional avoidance. Where once they felt overwhelmed by too much closeness, now they start to feel the void created by its absence. What's even more powerful is that your silence says something your words never could. It communicates self-respect. It shows you're no longer waiting, chasing, or clinging. That can be jarring for an avoidant who once relied on the emotional safety net of knowing you were there. Your distance becomes louder than any emotional outburst or pleading message. It doesn't provoke their defenses. Instead, it activates their realization. The fear of engulfment that drove them to leave now gets replaced by the fear of true loss. Because this time, you're not playing into the old dynamic. You're not begging for closeness or offering unconditional patience. You've chosen detachment, and that forces them to reevaluate everything. Not because you manipulated them, but because your stillness mirrors back their choices. It exposes the reality that they pushed away something valuable, and it may no longer be accessible. This shift can stir something deep within them, a mix of regret, longing, and a desire to reclaim what they abandoned. It's not your effort that pulls them back in, it's your withdrawal. And in that silence, they realize the connection they feared might have been the exact one they needed. Avoidants often appear emotionally detached, even cold. But beneath that exterior is a deep internal struggle, one that revolves around the fear of losing control. While they may act like they don't need connection or closeness, the truth is they want love, intimacy, and meaningful relationships. They just want it on their own terms, where they don't feel overwhelmed or vulnerable. This fear of losing control is the core reason they push people away, even the ones they care about most. Love threatens their sense of emotional independence, and vulnerability feels like handing someone else the steering wheel to their heart, and that's terrifying for them. When you're emotionally available, consistently present, and showing them love, it often makes them feel pressured, like they have to respond in kind or expose parts of themselves they've worked hard to keep hidden. That pressure, even if it's not coming from you intentionally, triggers their defense system. They pull back, withdraw, or even cut off contact, not to punish you, but to protect themselves from what they perceive as emotional chaos. But here's where things take a turn: when you stop chasing, when you stop trying to decode them, fix them, or convince them to stay, when you shift your focus inward and prioritize your own peace and well-being, something unexpected happens. Your emotional detachment doesn't trigger their defenses. It unsettles them, because in the absence of control, they begin to lose the upper hand they never consciously meant to have. Avoidants are used to being the one who determines the level of emotional closeness in a relationship. When you step back, you change that dynamic. Suddenly, they're no longer in control of the emotional tone. You are, and that shift is powerful. They're no longer managing your emotions to keep their own fears at bay. They're left alone with their feelings, and they can't escape them as easily this time. This is often when they start to reflect on what they pushed away, on what they miss, on how your calm distance feels more unsettling than your emotional presence ever did. You've stopped pursuing, and that silence creates space for them to feel what they've been running from all along. They begin to miss the version of themselves they were when they were with you, the safe, seen, and accepted version. Their craving for love resurfaces, but now it's not a fantasy of connection with control. It's a real longing for the connection they once had but didn't know how to keep. When you stop trying, You remove the emotional cushion that let them avoid growth. Your emotional neutrality becomes a mirror, and in that reflection, they see what they lost. And sometimes, that's exactly what triggers their desire to come back, not because they suddenly know how to love perfectly, but because your emotional stillness reminded them of what it feels like to truly be loved. There is something magnetic about someone who knows their worth and doesn't beg for love, chase validation, or cling to someone who isn't showing up for them. That kind of self-assuredness is rare, and avoidants feel it more than they'll ever admit. When you step back from someone who has been emotionally unavailable, especially an avoidant, and start focusing entirely on your own healing, your own life, your own goals, something powerful begins to happen. You become energetically untouchable. You're no longer trying to manage the relationship. You've reclaimed your emotional power, and it radiates in a way that is both inspiring and, for the avoidant, deeply unsettling. Avoidants are drawn to connection just like anyone else, but they often seek it through control. They are most comfortable when they can manage how close or far someone is allowed to get. But when you stop reacting to their push behavior and instead ground yourself in your own peace, you take yourself out of their emotional grip. That shift sends a clear message. I'm no longer available for this kind of instability. And that is something they can feel, even from miles away. Your detachment doesn't go unnoticed. In fact, it often triggers more reflection than any conversation ever could. Avoidants may not respond to your words, your tears, or your explanations, but they do notice your silence. They do notice when you stop checking in, when you stop trying, when you stop waiting, and that absence isn't just physical, it's energetic. It unsettles the dynamic they were once comfortable in. For the first time, they're not sure how you feel. And for the first time, they begin to realize that your presence was never guaranteed. It was earned. And maybe, just maybe, they took it for granted. When you focus on yourself, your growth, your joy, your healing, it shows. You're not doing it for them, you're doing it for you. But ironically, that's what pulls them in. That's when they start to wonder if they misjudged everything. If the person they pushed away was actually the person who offered them the rarest form of love, unconditional, yet boundaried. Safe, but not self-sacrificing. They remember how you made them feel, not just in your presence, but now in your absence. And that realization can shake the very foundations of the emotional walls they built so carefully. You didn't manipulate them. You didn't try to spark jealousy or play games. You just stopped chasing and started healing. You stopped overgiving and started receiving. You recentered yourself. And in doing that, you became the version of you that they can't forget. Not because you're trying to be unforgettable, but because self-worth is magnetic. And when you finally walk away from needing them to choose you, that's often when they finally see your value. Not because you were never enough, but because they weren't ready to recognize enough when they had it. When an avoidant comes back after creating distance or cutting off communication, it's easy to interpret their return as a sign of growth, healing, or emotional transformation. And while it's tempting to believe that time apart changed everything, the reality is often far more complicated. Their return doesn't always mean they've resolved their internal conflicts or are now capable of deep, consistent intimacy. More often, their desire to reconnect is driven by emotional discomfort, loneliness, or the unsettling realization that they may have pushed away something meaningful. Their comeback isn't always a sign of change. It's an opportunity for you to get clear on what you want, and what you're no longer willing to accept. Avoidants tend to come back when the silence gets heavy, when their coping mechanisms stop working, when the space they once craved turns into a void that they don't know how to fill. Your absence, your lack of pursuit, your emotional withdrawal, it all confronts them with the consequences of their own emotional unavailability. They might reach out with a casual message, an unexpected apology, or even a longing declaration. It's not always manipulative, sometimes it's sincere, but sincerity doesn't equal readiness. The real question isn't why did they come back, but rather what have they done with the time apart. It's critical to remember that someone missing you doesn't mean they're ready to meet your emotional needs. Regret is not the same as transformation. Loneliness is not the same as emotional availability. And nostalgia is not the same as commitment. An avoidant might come back because they miss the safety and security you offered. because they're struggling with the weight of their choices, or because they've realized how rare your presence truly was. But unless they've confronted the root of their avoidance, unless they've done the internal work, what they're offering may still fall short of what you deserve. This is your moment of power, not because they finally acknowledged your worth, but because you already did. You now get to decide if the same patterns are worth re-entering. You get to choose whether their return aligns with your boundaries, your growth, and your peace. This is where your self-respect leads the way, not your longing. You've seen what it feels like to be emotionally neglected. You've walked through the confusion, the self-doubt, the silence, and now you're not the same person you were when they left. Let their return be information, not validation. Pay attention to actions, not just emotions. Are they willing to communicate openly? Are they showing consistency, not just intensity? Are they respecting your pace and your boundaries? Or are they looking for comfort without accountability? The comeback might be flattering, emotional, even hopeful. But don't let it cloud your clarity. You're not just hoping they changed, you're asking, have they shown it? And more importantly, does this connection still serve the version of you that fought so hard to heal? In the end, understanding why avoidants come back isn't about waiting for them. It's about reclaiming your power, recognizing your worth, and trusting that their return is not proof of your value, but a reflection of what they couldn't see before. Whether you let them back in or choose to move forward without them, let that decision come from strength, not scarcity. Thank you for holding space for this truth, for choosing growth over confusion, and for remembering that your peace is not up for negotiation.